Well, it's great to be back with you, and I want to thank you all for your many prayers and cards and so forth. Those really meant a lot to me and helped a lot. You know, as a minister, I spend a lot of times in the hospital visiting others, and it's quite different to be on the other side of the situation. It was December 7th in the morning, actually the 8th was the morning that I actually noticed it, but December 7th is easier for me to remember. Anybody else remember that? Pearl Harbor. So helps me remember when it happened, but after going to the emergency room and getting all the different tests done, I spent the night in the hospital. And then they suggested strongly that I go through rehab, so I was there for a couple of weeks and then went to rehab outside for several weeks. It made progress, and I think I'm going in the right direction. I wanted to look at one verse before we really get into the lesson, but it's in Acts chapter 20. And I don't know why I thought about this, but because of my experience, it kind of came to my mind. And I was going to preach a whole sermon on this, but didn't think I could get that much out of this one incident. Probably could, but who remembers Eutychus? Yeah. Have you ever heard an entire sermon on that, Eutychus? I never have preached one, so I was thinking about it. Maybe someday I will. But it's kind of interesting, the unexpected nature of what happens here and the wonderful blessing of how it turned out. Verse 7, Acts chapter 20. On the first day of the week, we came together to break bread. Paul spoke to the people, and because he intended to leave the next day, he kept talking until midnight. Well, that would be too much for some of us, I think, talking till midnight, but I've often wondered what he spoke about for as long as he did, and how neat it would be to hear him speak and be able to ask questions. I have a lot of questions about certain scriptures that I'd like to know more about. But anyway, there were many lamps in the upstairs room where we were meeting. Seated in a window was a young man named Eutychus, who was sinking into a deep sleep as Paul talked on and on. When he was sound asleep, he fell to the ground from the third story and was picked up dead. Paul went down, threw himself on the young man, and put his arms around him. "Don't be alarmed," he said. "He's alive." Then he went upstairs again and broke bread and ate. After talking until daylight, didn't stop at midnight, he talks until daylight, he left. The people took the young man home alive and were greatly comforted. I've seen people fall asleep during services many times. None of them fell out a window or died that I knew about. But what a blessing that this man, Eutychus, was able to endure such an experience and still be alive. I'd like to ask him a lot about that situation too. But I want to talk about how to deal with difficult days. Because for me, this is the only time, except a few months earlier when I had a bladder stone removed. First time I've been in the hospital my entire life. So it was kind of new and different, like I said earlier. But how do we deal with these times where new and threatening things happen to us? It is a challenge, and I did learn a few things, I think, from that time. But I'd like us to look at times in the life of Jesus, and he had many where he likewise faced difficult times in his life. How was he able to endure? So if you'll turn to John chapter 7, and I want to talk a little bit about dealing with difficult or dark and difficult days. because we'll all face them. I know we know that, but sometimes it's good to prepare for difficult days. John chapter 7, beginning in verse 1. After this, Jesus went around in Galilee, purposely staying away from Judea, because the Jews there were waiting to take his life. But when the Jewish feast of tabernacles was near, Jesus' brothers said to him, "You ought to leave here and go to Judea, so that your disciples may see the miracles you do. No one who wants to become a public figure acts in secret. Since you're doing these things, you should show yourself to the world." For even his brothers did not believe him. Therefore Jesus told him, "The right time for me has not yet come. For you any time's right. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me, because I testify what it does is evil. You go to the feast. I am not yet going up to this feast, because for me the right time has not yet come." Having said this, he stayed in Galilee. So we find several things out about Jesus here. Number one, the world hated him because of his message. That what they were doing was evil. They weren't setting their eyes and their lives in the right direction on the right things. And without doubt, some reason that we as Christians, as followers of Christ, maybe we're not as popular as we'd like to be. We're saying that some of the things in this world are not good. And you're wasting your times if you put too much time and effort in things of this world. And any time we speak out against something that people maybe enjoy doing or is popular to do, we might be likewise rejected. So I think we have to expect, as followers of Jesus, that some people may not appreciate our message. Even though it's a good message, it's a saving message. We found peace and delight in it. Some people may not, because they're doing things they shouldn't be doing. Well, his own brothers didn't believe in him. So they're kind of taunting him. You go up, you go to preach and teach and show the world. And you know that would be hard to have your own family. In fact, some of us probably do have family members that are not followers of Jesus and think we're probably crazy to put all our time into something of this nature. But you know, what we have is what the world's searching for in the other things they're looking at. We have peace and we have joy and we have a future that is certain and good. And it's nice to know that when maybe what you're going through is somewhat challenging in life. Now, the stroke I had was very small and didn't have a great impact. For a while there, I was a little dizzy and, just had to be careful. Every time I needed to use the restroom in the hospital, I had to ring a button so somebody would go with me. And, it's kind of humbling to be there. And it's kind of sad to not be able to do everything you once were doing. So it's kind of a shock in different ways and kind of a challenge. And so Jesus here is not able to go where he wants because people are trying to kill him. So he was limited. And he wasn't popular with a lot of people. And even his own family members were against him. And again, some of us may recognize those things. Now, I think as far as the hospital and so forth, I found myself thinking, wow, this is how people felt. And I wasn't as bad as a lot of people who had been through things like this before. But I kind of resolved to be even more, hopefully, attentive to people who have needs. And your cards and your calls were very meaningful. And I didn't realize that it would mean that much. So keep on doing the good you are. People do need it, and people are greatly encouraged by it. So continue to do good there. Why was it that Jesus didn't go up to this feast? That's another thing. I'm sure he'd probably been almost every year of his life to this point, this feast of the Jews, the feast that he was missing. And to have your own family say, you ought to go, they weren't doing that because they thought he really needed it or anything of that nature, but kind of ridiculing him, thinking you ought to go up and show off, and maybe the world would believe in you. For whatever reason, the motives weren't exactly right. They didn't believe in him. And so he stayed home because his time wasn't right. And I'm thinking in our lives how important timing is. What time should I say the right thing? When should I go visit this person? And Jesus knew that his time hadn't come yet. He was here for a purpose, and he wanted to do everything he could to accomplish the most with the time he had. Well, he goes up later, stayed in Galilee a while. It says in verse 10, after his brothers had left for the feast, he went also, not publicly, but in secret. Now at the feast, the Jews were watching for him and asking, "Where is that man?" They were indeed looking for him and wanting to probably get rid of him, as it said earlier. Among the crowds, there was widespread whispering about him. Some said, "He's a good man." Others replied, "No, he deceives the people." But no one would say anything publicly about him for fear of the Jews. So there's a lot of talk about Jesus. He made a great impact with his claims and his teaching and his miracles, and did influence many to believe in him, but many others were very much opposed. Likewise today, of course, the message of Jesus is very well known. But in our own little circle, maybe, there's probably people that are looking at us and wondering about the life we're living or leading. And it says next in verse 14, it wasn't until halfway through the feast that Jesus did go up to the temple courts and begin to teach. This feast was a week long, and so he waited till halfway through. The Jews were amazed and asked, "How did this man get such learning without having studied?" Apparently at this time there was rabbinical schools that guys would go to prepare to be a public rabbi and a teacher. But Jesus hadn't gone to any of those, but the people that heard him realized there was wisdom in what he spoke. One other time, at least, people were sent to get Jesus and bring him in. They didn't, and they were asked why they didn't get Jesus. And they said, "Never did a man speak the way this man speaks." So they were amazed at what he was saying. And I would encourage us to know what we're talking about, to know that the message of Jesus is salvation. It's a message of hope and forgiveness. And we have a future. We do have with our message, the message of Jesus, what the world needs to hear. But for whatever reason, there's many who would rather follow their own way. And Jesus answered these people, "My teaching's not my own. It comes from him who sent me. If anyone chooses to do God's will, he will find out whether or not my teaching comes from God, or whether I speak on my own." And so the message itself is a witness of its truthfulness. The Sermon on the Mount and the many teachings Jesus taught, when we look at them closely, we see wisdom. We see that it will work and it will help the world to be a better place. Jesus goes on in verse 18 of John 7. "He who speaks on his own does so to gain honor for himself. But he who works for the honor of the one who sent him, he's a man of truth. There's nothing false about him. Has not Moses given you the law, and yet not one of you keeps the law? Why are you trying to kill me?" Jesus was teaching the words of the Father. He wasn't putting himself up. on a pedestal, but he was teaching what God wanted him to teach. The people, however, verse 28, said to Jesus, "You're demon-possessed." The crowd answered, "Who's trying to kill you?" Jesus said to them, "I did one miracle, and you are astonished. Yet, because Moses gave you circumcision, though it actually did not come from Moses but from the patriarchs, you circumcise a child on the Sabbath. Now, if a child can be circumcised on the Sabbath so that the law of Moses may not be broken, why are you angry with me for healing the whole man on the Sabbath? Stop indulging by mere appearances and make a righteous judgment." Jesus was coming to heal the whole man, not just a circumcision that they didn't want to break themselves, but they were getting after Jesus for doing miracles and so forth on the Sabbath, doing good for others. It says then in verse 25, at some point, some of the people of Jerusalem began to ask, "Isn't this man they're trying to kill? Isn't this the man they're trying to kill? Here he is speaking publicly, and they're not saying a word to him. Have the authorities really concluding that he is the Christ? But we know where this man came from. No one will know where he is from." You know, they didn't really look into the story of Jesus. They didn't realize that Jesus, had been born in Bethlehem, and they didn't look into the history of that. "Yes, you know me. You know where I'm from. I'm not here to do my own, but him who sent me is true. You do not know him, but I know him because I am from him, and he sent me." At this, they tried to seize him, but no one laid a hand on him because his time had not yet come. It's interesting that timing was so important, and Jesus had more things to do and say and before his time would come. Still, many in the crowd put their faith in him. They said, "When the Christ comes, will he do more miraculous signs than this man?" So the signs did point out that Jesus was the Messiah, and he did many of signs before them, and many believed. Well, the Pharisees heard the crowd whispering such things about him. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees sent temple guards to arrest him. Jesus said, "I'm only with you for a short time, and then I'll go to the one who sent me. You will look for me, but you will not find me. Where I am, you cannot come." The Jews said to one another, "Where does this man intend to go that we cannot find him? Will he go where our people live scattered among the Gentiles and teach the Gentiles? What did he mean when he said, 'You will look for me, but you will not find me'? And where I am, you cannot come." So they were still mystified by what he was saying to them. On the last and greatest day of the feast, Jesus stood and said in a loud voice, "If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, streams of living water will flow from within him." By this he meant the Spirit, whom those who had believed up in him were later to receive. Up to that time the Spirit had not been given, since Jesus had not been glorified. So there's a promise here for the followers of Jesus that the Spirit would be given to them. Hadn't come yet. It was on the day of Pentecost later. When they repented and were baptized, they received the gift of the Holy Spirit, an indwelling gift that would strengthen them and help them. Now, the allusion to water here probably goes back to the fact that on the last and the greatest day of the feast, the high priest would bring water and pour upon the people there. In fact, we can read about this in Isaiah chapter 44 is one place. That's the background for the verse we're reading here. Isaiah 44 and verses 3 and 4. For I will pour out water on the thirsty land, and streams on the dry ground. I will pour out my Spirit on your offspring, and my blessings on your descendants. So long before, this is nearly over 700 years before, this event there, feast in John chapter 7 we're reading about, when they saw a high priest come out with this water, that had been going on for many, many years. And Jesus is now saying, I'll give you the Spirit, and that'll help you through these difficult times. On hearing his words, some of the people said, surely this man is the prophet. Others said, he is the Christ. Still others, how can the Christ come from Galilee? Does not the Scripture say that the Christ will come from David's family? And from Bethlehem, the town where David lived? Thus the people were divided because of Jesus. Some wanted to seize him, but no one laid a hand on him. They didn't look into it enough to realize that Jesus was from Bethlehem. He had been from the city of David, but they thought he came down from Galilee. Finally, the temple guards, went back to the chief priests and the Pharisees, who asked them, why didn't you bring him? And here's the verse I referred to a little while ago. No one ever spoke the way this man does, the guards declared. You mean he's deceived you also? The Pharisees retorted. Has any of the rulers of the Pharisees believed in him? No, but this mob that knows nothing of the law, there's a curse on them. They didn't even look into the life of Jesus enough to know that he had been from Bethlehem. Kind of ironical here, they thought the mob was just ignorant. Nicodemus, and we had met him before in the Gospel of John, who had gone to Jesus earlier, and who was one of their own members, said, does our law condemn anyone without first hearing him to find out what he's doing? They replied, are you from Galilee too? Look into it. You'll find that a prophet does not come out of Galilee. So they all had their reasons for not following Jesus. But they didn't realize Jesus was the prophet they were looking for. He was the one that could help lead them out of their difficulties. And he is the one that we can look to help us through difficult times. I believe the Spirit, when given to us, can help strengthen us, help guide us through difficult times. I don't know exactly how, but sometimes we need just a little extra help in our difficult times. So in the life of Jesus, he had many times where people denied him, ridiculed him, made fun of him, and didn't follow him. But his very wisdom and the deeds that he did showed he was who he claimed to be. And so many followed in spite of the religious leaders. Today, as we deal with difficult times in our own lives, let us never forget the words and the teachings of Jesus help lead us through. As we try to talk to others, if we can share with them the teachings of Jesus, we can help our world be a better place. We all need Jesus. You know, we're all going to die. The ultimate gift of Jesus is a resurrection of our own. And in Romans chapter 8, where it talks about the Spirit, it says that same power or Spirit that gave Jesus life will work in us as well. So the resurrection of Jesus proves that we will likewise be raised from the dead. What a blessing that is. I don't think that maybe I went that close to death in my struggle, but it does make you think when your health is affected, maybe I ought to start thinking about where I'm going to spend eternity. And so there's positive, even in a difficult time, that we redirect our lives and reassess the value. What a blessing to know Jesus and to know that no matter what happens to us, one day we'll be resurrected to be with him in heaven. What a blessing. If you have a need, maybe that somehow we can help through more teaching or prayer or just encouragement, if you'd be kind enough to let us know, we can help you as we stand and sing this song of invitation.